Hi everyone. It's first Facebook Live in quite a while, and that's because I've been quietly battling through the first trimester of my second pregnancy. So a little announcement there for you all. The second huge announcement, I think this one's way more exciting, is that Dr. Steven Lin, renowned dentist and author of the amazing best-selling book, The Dental Diet. Pass me the book. Pass the book. Every single parent needs to buy this book. It's the most incredible, profound, it just ties absolutely everything together that we know about. Well, I think it covers so much more than dental health. Certainly everything that we talk about here on this page about diet, but so much more. It's very hard to sort of summarize that. But Dr. Steven Lin is actually a last minute addition to our already stellar lineup of speakers at our upcoming Thriving Kids event on the Central Coast, which is only an hour drive for Sydney-siders. Don't be put off by that. That's coming up on July 29th, and it's a full day of just incredible speakers, a lot of authors who are bringing their books to sign and sell on the day. So we have Jude LaRoe, Holly Davis, Alex Stewart, Lisa Kuduff, Brenda Janchek, and of course, thank you very much, local dentist. I've discovered he's my local dentist. I'm very, very excited. But yeah, so we have that event coming up called Thriving Kids. We're raising money for, basically we're taking the government to court for trying to put a coal mine under a very sensitive water catchment up here on the Central Coast, which basically affects the water supply of 300,000 people, the whole of the Central Coast region, which is the fastest growing residential region in the entire country. So that's what we're trying to do. No mean feat. And so Dr. Steven Lin is going to be added to that lineup. He's going to be speaking first. If you want to come along in Sydney, this event would cost about $300. It's $97 to come along, and will be such an amazing day. I encourage all parents to get there. So I'm really excited to chat to you. I'd love for you to give a little bit of an introduction to how you came to be, because I just was saying this to you earlier, when we look at holistic dentists, I've spoken to a lot of them. They tie together a lot of the things that you're talking about in terms of the all of the muscular stuff, the breathing stuff, all of that, but not too many of them are really as involved with the diet side as you are. How did you get to be so interested in that side of things?
Yeah, it's been a very interesting road, and firstly, I'm really excited to be part of the whole event because I think it's such a big topic that really all parents and the whole community needs to get behind. And one thing that parents really can do now is to make sure their kids thrive. Yeah. And that was one of probably the steps in for my own way into this whole space, is that I was seeing a lot of sick kids coming to the practice, and they weren't really being classified as being having any kind of growth issue or any problem besides something that had to be fixed. Yeah. And so dental practices are great kind of places where we can go and treat disease, and there's so many great options we have now to surgically remove, to replace teeth, implants, orthodontic options. But it began to kind of run through my head as I was looking at into all these mouths, and that there really wasn't a lot of understanding as to why the diseases were happening.
It sounds like it's just the whole story mirrors Dr. Weston Price. It's like exactly the same kind of thought process.
Yeah, and this was the amazing thing. Along my road is that I had this idea, and I was just like, can I do this for the rest of my life? Really, just kind of fixing,
being the Band-Aid guy.
Yeah, a tooth mechanic. Yeah. And it really kind of rang through my head, and I actually took some time away. I went traveling. I was actually in a travels hostel in Turkey, and I came across a book with the name on the title called Weston A. Price, and the title was Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. Well,
arguably one of the best health books ever written.
Yeah,
before yours.
I think it's the most important book, and I'd never heard of it. So in 7 years of tertiary education, I was never told about Weston A. Price or his many books that he wrote, and nutrition.
And he was quite a prominent figure in the dental world.
He was the lead or the founder of the research arm of the American Dental Association.
Yeah. And for 25 years he was the head, right? And so it's like, that's pretty profound, and yet you didn't hear a thing about it.
Not a thing, yeah. And I think there's a story behind why Weston A. Price went kind of, got thrown into not even to the history books. He got completely lost. Yeah. And really, nutrition and physical degeneration was the culmination of a lifetime of research, and it's just amazing what I did. I opened up this book and I saw that a dentist in the early 1900s had gone to 14 cultures around the world, to nearly every continent on the planet, and looked at cultures before the modern diet intersects. So when traditional diet meets the modern diet, what happens to the mouth? And then the other thing he added into, he looked into the ancestral lines of the people there. So he would check the jaws and teeth, which most of our anthropological data is based in. And he showed that dental disease doesn't happen. And then the really eye-opening thing that I saw is that he showed people with good craniofacial development. So straight 32 teeth, no wisdom teeth impactions, no braces needed. And then as soon as the modern diet pops in, we see
all of those
deformities, crooked teeth. But we also see tooth decay pop up to its modern rates. But the big one was dental malocclusion. That was never mentioned to me in dental practice, school, where what was the cause of crooked teeth. And if you think about it, it's the biggest problem on the planet. As a human population, our craniofacial systems aren't developing, and so that began to really crack open my mind as to there's a lot here I don't know about the body, and there was a big story behind what we're seeing now in kids, mouths and teeth, and that really that it's all based in food. And I had a bit of a background, in sports nutrition and biomedical science, so I was tilted the way towards understanding how the body works. So that led me into a whole road of understanding what Western A. Price was talking about, but then really food can develop and really guides the development of the craniofacial system, and that to me is something I think it's the most important aspect of medicine, functional dentistry we need to implement, and every parent to understand is that their kids' craniofacial development, the way their teeth develop is vitally important. And so that was really the best.
And that you can do something about it. It's not just like wait for the orthodontist bill when they're 15. So I think that's what I'd really love for you to talk about is I guess what are we looking for? So what sort of problems do you start to see and how early should you be looking at problems? I think obviously early, right? What sort of problems are we looking for? How can you tell, obviously there's mouth breathing, what signs and symptoms are indicative of problems down the track? And also I'd love you to talk about the idea that, because I had a lot of orthodontic work done, is that fixing the crooked teeth doesn't deal with the cause at all and doesn't solve that's the kind of the superficial aesthetics, if you will, rather than actually dealing with the cause and healing the real root cause of the problem. Yeah,
absolutely, and that's really where this functional medicine movement is stepping to understanding the cause of the problem and the root reason why the condition's occurring. But there are some very simple ways to pick up the symptoms of slower craniofacial development. And we were just talking before, but even prenatal nutrition is really important in that, because we're showing now that kids' jaws and craniofacial structures aren't developing in the womb. And it's really quite alarming, really, when you think of.
It's horrifying, but thankfully we're in the information age. I just want to shut, because I feel like if we had known in our generation, the amount of money it would have saved my parents on my orthodontic work, but also my hyperactivity at school, and I didn't have learning difficulties, but just couldn't concentrate. I'm sure it's all related to the same problem, but it's I just want to scream it to this generation of parents before it's too late. It's you've got to catch it early. Keep going.
We've got the tools now and they're very simple signs. Parents can do a lot at home too, and the one you mentioned is breathing. And so the really important thing to remember is that the jaws and the teeth sit in the same structures, the upper and lower jaws, which is the maxilla and mandible. They house the airways, and so when a child has a high palate, a high, skinny, narrow, V-shaped palate,
which is a lot of kids.
You don't see.
I haven't seen a normal palate in a little while, but I just don't know if I'm looking at the wrong children.
Nearly.
I was unusual because I had a really high palate and I was the odd one out. Whereas now I haven't seen a normal.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think about the percentage of kids now that have braces compared to, say, generations when I went to school and then generations before that, it's just skyrocketing. And we just think it's normal. And we've got this strange way of having amnesia in a way of forgetting what we're supposed to supposed to be like.
Exactly.
But so when your teeth don't develop straight, when you have a high palate and you have narrow maxilla and mandibles, then your airways aren't developed, and so they're kids that can't breathe through their nose because they have cramped nasal sinuses. So a high palate means a lower volume in the nasal sinuses.
Yeah.
And so that by definition means they cannot breathe through the nose as well as a kid with a nice wide palate.
And so how does that show up? As what would a parent see in their child if they don't know what a high palate looks like? What does that look like?
So the first thing they would see is often, if you look up into a kid's mouth, you would see a V-shaped palate, and you would see a high palate.
Kind of where the thumb should go, and that's
exactly.
what they blame it on, right? The thumb pushed it up.
Well, yeah, that's
it can help. But
yeah. Well, the thumb can do that, and so sometimes it will look like there's been a thumb pressed up into the palate.
Yeah.
But so what it will look like is that they'll have the cramped front teeth.
Yeah.
They'll have the mouth open at rest.
Yeah.
And the reason why that mouth is open is because they can't breathe. They don't feel comfortable breathing through the nose.
Yeah.
And so that they mouth breathe out of necessity, and then it becomes a habit.
Yeah.
And then so all of that contributes to slow craniofacial development. So slow jaws that are narrow palate, and then it contributes. And then so what happens, we get inflammation in the airway, so swollen tonsils, because we don't get the filtration through the immune system through the nasal sinuses, and then we get these big tonsils.
And then we take those out, and then it's showing that leads to all sorts of immune problems later in life, of course.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't even think about what's happening in the gut then.
Yeah, exactly.
And why we have that inflammation in the body anyway.
Yeah.
So there's this narrow face, and so mouth open. The one thing we find is that the tongue's at the bottom of the mouth.
Yeah.
So we often find that kids, they'll either have a tongue push habit. So if you watch a child drink water, if their head goes forward or if they're kind of straining their eyes a lot, it usually means they've got a tongue push, and that means the tongue's going forward instead of up.
Yeah.
And that's because the tongue's not getting to that roof of the palate to swallow as it should.
Yeah.
And the swallow should go right to the back of the palate, and where the hard palate meets the soft palate, which is the back of the throat, the tongue should reach right up there, and so a child should be able to swallow without moving their head at all.
Right.
And so if we see a tongue push swallow, that's when you get that open bite at the front. So parents where their kids bite together, their kids' teeth bite together and they don't meet, that's called an open bite, and that's because the tongue's coming forward all the time.
Right.
And so that's because we don't have that posture to the roof of the palate.
Yeah.
So these are all the signs, and so basically you'll see a kid with a thin face, open mouth, runny nose, dark circles. They can't breathe through their nose. When they go to sleep, they snore. And so very, very typical today, and it's nearly across the board where we have kids with sleep disorders because they don't have the craniofacial structures, the architecture of their airways when they go to sleep
well enough at night time. Oh gosh, it's just, and there's so many implications, which you would know in a heartbeat, but some people may not know. Like further along, what does that result in? Obviously, orthodontic work potentially, but that's just kind of the aesthetics. I mean, you can fix that. What other problems are they looking at?
Yeah, so the big one is that when this breathing that we're talking about, so the nasal sinuses is where we're designed to push air through into our respiratory system. So it crosses the air with nitric oxide, which increases perfusion of blood in the lungs and also in the nasal sinuses, so it increases the perfusion of oxygen. So when you don't breathe through the nose deeply, you're basically throwing air in and out of your chest, and you're not getting any oxygen. And so what happens is that we get this survival mode of breathing, and so it's very shallow chest breathing. Which most
adults have kind of adapted to anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the mouth breath. So if you look at your child and you see this very shallow kind of huffing and puffing, their chest moving, they don't know how to breathe deeply into their diaphragm through their nose. And it's crucial because when they go to sleep, this is how they breathe as well. So the posture of the airways, the tongue to the palate, the tongue connects to the base of the skull, it connects to the hyoid bone, it connects to the lower jaw, it holds the airways open. So when they don't know how to use their tongue properly, or they can't, if they're tongue-tied, which is another
another kind of
it's another kind of
I'd love to talk about that. We have to do a follow-up interview. The other 20 topics that I really want to discuss. So it's so big and it's so complex, but at the same time, it's so logical if you understand all the pieces of the puzzle, which you clearly do, and you tie it all together so beautifully in your book. There's just so many things I want to talk about. I would love to, if it's not jumping all over the place, can we talk about, because I think my followers would really appreciate, because I think most of my followers are really very literate in gut health, and this relationship where it's really kind of one and the same, like just in terms of when we're talking about prenatal conception, like the mother's gut basically microbiome influences the vaginal microbiome, and it's all the same. It's pretty much identical in the mouth, isn't it? And do you want to talk about that, the oral microbiome as its own piece of the puzzle, and what we should be doing and not doing to promote the diversity of that microbiome?
Absolutely, yes. So the probably the biggest piece of advice we've been given for our mouth is to scrub and disinfect.
It's like germ theory in the mouth.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
Kill everything.
Yeah, and we're still there. We're still thinking that we need to kill the infective bacteria, but we now know since 2008, it's only 10 years ago, so we have to remember that this is quite new science. Yeah. But the thing is with the information
like
age,
a rogue dentist.
The thing about the gut microbiome is it's exploded so quickly, right? So 2006 there wasn't a paper.
Exactly.
Yeah, there wasn't even a paper, and then so 2008 it all exploded, and all of a sudden we have this creeping into medicine. But the oral microbiome has been ignored in a way, because you have to remember that dentists knew that tooth decay was caused by bacteria, well before this.
Yeah.
So we were kind of thinking along that line, but not in the same sense.
Yeah.
And the thing we know now, though, is that there's probiotic bacteria, and that the whole ecology of the mouth is what's important. So the broadest thing we can find from the research, and the most profound thing, is that what we've changed in our mouth that causes this modern state of disease is that when you take our modern dental plaque and compare it to our ancestral dental plaque, we vastly decrease the diversity. And so when you take away the diversity, so they picked plaque off
fossilized
dental plaque, which I find sometimes in the practice. But when you take that away, and it's the same thing when you compare to hunter-gatherer gut microbiomes. They have far more
just the diversity is lost across the board.
Yeah, exactly.
So interesting. I just think this is so fascinating, because it just mirrors exactly what we're finding in the gut as well.
Oh, absolutely, and it's a part of the gut.
Yeah.
So you swallow thousands of bacteria every second.
Yeah.
And so
they're literally connected.
Yeah,
it is the gut, isn't it? Really.
Completely. That's it. It's a beginning, and this was one part of where I found Weston Price's work had kind of been continued, because he didn't go so much into the bacterial side of things, but he was more into the nutrient side. But we've painted that whole picture now, so where we can see the entire picture from when you put something in your mouth, you chew it, it's broken down by saliva, it's swallowed with all the oral microbiome bacteria, gone into your gut, into the gut microbiome, and then digested across the digestive system with the cross link to the immune system. Suddenly you've got links to the whole body. This is the oral systemic connection in motion, and we are swallowing these things every second. While we're scrubbing and disinfecting, we're taking away the bacteria that protect us. There was a study last year that showed that people that use alcoholic mouthwashes every day increase the risk of type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, and that we know the gut diversity of type 2 diabetics is
like a
decreased.
precursor to
Exactly. So then if we're having mouthwash, we're decreasing the diversity in our mouth. So one thing everyone can stop doing is
following any mainstream advice.
No. But
it's like that sort of slash and burn kind of philosophy, that germ theory, taking antibiotics at the drop of the hat because you've got a cold. That sort of, it's the same attitude. What practices do you? I love the toothpaste that I've walked in. I'm like, I need to get some of the activated charcoal toothpaste. What are the more? Obviously, we're trying to promote more diversity in the mouth, just as we are in the gut, because that diversity protects us, as same in our gardens. If we have a diversity of soil microbes, there's less likely to be invasion of weeds and that sort of thing. So it's like bringing up the diversity prevents the overgrowth of pathogenic bacteria, which is a good thing. How do we do that? How do we promote diversity in the mouth?
So the underlying way is via diet. And so we have to remember that toothbrushes, flosses, and mouthwashes didn't exist, just barely a few decades ago.
And that's what I love about Weston Price, saying that there was green slime all over the teeth but no cavities. It just proves the point that really brushing can be handy when you have a bad diet, but that's the nutrition that is the fundamental part, right?
Exactly. The way I kind of see it is that, if you have a problem with your car, you don't take it to the car wash. You don't go and scrub the...
I use the same analogy.
You do?
I do. I say don't go and get like a paint job when you've got a massive problem with your motor.
You have to get under the motor. Exactly. And that's unfortunately what we've been doing with the idea of prevention in dental care. We've got so much information in the mouth that we can actually that can control many things throughout the body. And the big thing with kids is that no child brushes their teeth right. You know,
No, I've tried. I wait to see if your kids do. Maybe they will.
yeah, he'll be under a lot of pressure.
I'm a dentist. The Lord's live up to you.
But you know, like I've looked into nearly
it's
no child.
It's not a foolproof method to protect their teeth. Like
No,
you just
it doesn't.
Right.
No, their diet is the absolute way to protect their teeth. And we've heard so much about sugar and obviously all the harmful things, which are harmful.
Yeah.
But
it's not the underlying root cause.
Exactly.
It's the trigger. Like the sun is the trigger for skin cancer. It's not the cause of skin cancer.
Exactly.
The diet is the cause.
And that was the real message of Weston A. Price, is that he said that there were nutritive factors that were lost from when we moved from a traditional diet to a modern diet.
And that was in the 40s.
Exactly.
Like, think about it. Like, and now if you look at the apple in the 40s versus the apple now, it's like the nutrients that we've lost, and then the anti-fat campaign really got in full swing, and we now have a generation of children whose mothers are deficient in vitamin K2 and vitamin D across the board. Everybody, pretty much, having children, and that's how can they possibly have healthy teeth after that?
When you put it on a timeline like that, when you see what's happened, and Price said himself, he goes, the problem is sugar, white flour, and vegetable oils.
Yeah.
When you look at the supermarket package today, that's all it's in. And people don't even know. And like you say, the low fat movement then chugged on to the low fat all the dieting movement of the 80s and 90s. Yeah. All of a sudden, we had all of this food that was completely further devoid from the 1900s when Price was looking at. And now we have kids that can barely fit. We have sometimes impacted second molars, so 12-year-old molars that don't have enough jaw room to fit.
Wow.
And if that's not alarming.
And the decaying teeth, like I've just seen plenty of fairly healthy women having children where the teeth just crumble away. And I would say mine were at risk of that. I've always had very thin sort of enamel. I mean, I wanted to talk to you. I know so many things. I don't want to spend too long. We can do a follow-up call. Do you want to talk a little bit about, obviously sugar's a problem, but I think it's a trigger. Can you talk a little bit about the effect of breastfeeding? Because I feel very, very strongly that breastfeeding is miraculous across the board. And women are told to stop breastfeeding their children if there's any dental decay. What is there a benefit to that? Or obviously that doesn't treat the cause, but does it exacerbate decay?
So I think with breastfeeding is that what we now know is that there's a fantastic thing going on between mother and child.
Yeah.
And what we often don't think about is that the mother's health is incredibly important. So her vitamin D levels, we know in the studies they show that she transfers the level of vitamin D from her breast milk to the child.
Yeah.
So if we have nutrient deficient milk going to a child, and then there can be functional issues. So if there's tongue and lip tie, if we don't have proper clearance, if there are a number of issues that can occur, that's the proper cause of tooth decay. The breastfeeding is not. So what the statement is from the pediatric dental fraternity is that breastfeeding can cause tooth decay.
Yeah.
That's true, but
under certain circumstances.
And the real issue is that no one is looking at the maternal health there.
Yeah.
And that we really should be thinking about why the child is getting, and that not all breast milk is made equal, and we really need to nurture it as well. And so the mother's diet as well is so important too.
And also the way that the birth unfolds. It's hard to talk about birth because if it hasn't unfolded perfectly, there's a lot of mother guilt attached to it. But I guess the amount of probiotics found, like I was just blown away by the research recently that showed 700 strains of probiotics and 200 strains of prebiotics in the tongue scraping. We'll come back to that as the value in tongue scraping. But so it's like the sheer amount of probiotics found in the breast milk. If the mother's gone into labour naturally, even if she ends up with a cesarean, that number of strains is higher. So it's interesting. But is that protective?
Absolutely, yes.
Having that breast milk does that improve the oral microbiome on some level? Well,
the studies show that lactobacillus species, which is big in both breast milk, but also they take it from yogurt and whatnot, they are by definition protective. And but there's a large spectrum of lactobacillus species. Some cause decay, but it's when they don't have the full spectrum there. So it very much, breast milk and breastfeeding should be encouraged where possible, and sometimes it's not always possible. But the other thing too is we should know how profound it is for the child's development of the jaw, the teeth.
The sucking motion and having the pressure.
Exactly. And it's the tongue to the roof of the palate.
Yeah.
And even seeing a little bit now, even kids that are breastfed, sometimes when they have, for instance, tongue and lip ties, they'll actually feed in a way with a push swallow. So even sometimes the breastfeeding can
can be exacerbating the problem because the ties are there.
Yeah, sometimes. And
interesting.
And so that's why it's important to lactation specialists to see it so we can identify latch issues. And it's vitally important. There's they talk
so
about
many pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely, and the nutrient picture as well, because you have all the bacteria, you have all the different species, but then the nutrients in terms of A, D, and K2, the fat soluble vitamins.
My audience will know a lot about that.
Excellent.
I'm obsessed with the fat soluble.
Makes me so happy.
You don't have to explain that. Liver, that's why we know that.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about tongue scraping? Is there any seems to be a popular thing to do at the moment? Do you think that is a good idea?
So going back to the oral microbiome, the surface of your tongue does harbour populations of bacteria, and so what can happen is that in case of bad breath, and so often we have causes from the gut, but often we have problems in the mouth as well, and so you can get surfaces, so there's a white scraping across a layer across the tongue, and so tongue scraping can actually help to remove that smear layer. So you do get like a plaque layer across the tongue. And so for people that suffer from bad breath or post-nasal drip or some kind of, it's usually either nasal or gut reflux, there might be a certain level of dysbiosis there which you can actually remove. And so we test bad breath here with oral chromatography, and so we often find that...
So interesting. I want to know about the technical stuff.
It's an interesting one because a lot of people have very chronic issues with the bad breath, and it comes from usually there's a cause in the mouth and then elsewhere in the body. But so what tongue scraping can do is clear the dysbiosis, and then we can repopulate with the probiotic bacteria.
Okay, can you talk about that just quickly? Can you talk about probiotics for the mouth?
So we have oral probiotics. So there's the specific few strains. So the S. Salivarius species. So what the studies have found is that in healthy mouths in the absence of disease, these bacteria are usually more prevalent. So M18 and K12 are the big. We've got the probiotics, the prodental. So those are the species. With probiotics, it's it is a needle in a haystack. But for instance, for gum disease, so gum disease is a big one. For kids with rampant decay, I think dental probiotics, do play a role, and so bad breath as well. And so we can repopulate
as a temporary sort of helping to get it back in check. And
the other thing too is that people with certain dysbiosis, if they do have things like gut issues and SIBO, they do struggle with things like ferments and stuff. So sometimes a probiotic will help to kind of introduce those kind of species. So dental probiotics are helpful. Gum disease, rampant tooth decay, bad breath. If we're trying to repopulate alongside a gut probiotic too,
It's all so exciting. I think I could talk. I don't know how long. How long have we been talking? I don't know. Should we wrap it up there? I could keep talking, but maybe we'll do a follow-up call. Are you tired at the end of your day?
I'm fine. Yeah, it's up to you.
No, I've covered everything I really wanted to cover. So so what do you think you're going to be talking about specifically at the event? I'd love to know. So
what we'll talk about the signs to show whether your child is developing craniofacial, so the risk of braces. And so the classical orthodontic line that we always kind of think of is that you reach age 12, that's when the adult dentition comes in, and then sometimes they extract teeth, which is really quite tragic when you think about it, and then put braces. Braces just address the symptom. You brought it up so well before. Very few people kind of understand that, and that we can pick up the signs well before that. Even in the childhood dentition, there are signs that you can pick up in terms of their bite, in terms of whether their habits, or whether they can't latch during breastfeeding. Sometimes there's a tongue tie or there's a lip tie. All of those things contribute to whether we have a nice straight dental arch at 12, and so we can pick those. And that's everything. That's breathing. That's absolutely. That's the attractiveness of the face. Even it's like the way that their face looks for the rest of their life, almost. It's everything, and it's so crucial because it influences how they sleep, their neural development, the deep levels of sleep they can get into. If they don't breathe right, then they can't get that deep REM sleep that their brain needs to develop, and it's just.
And really, I think these problems with breathing, I think, and hopefully you can talk about that on the day, the effect, I guess the biochemical effect of poor breathing, which I didn't know. I had a friend who was at the Edgecliff Breathing Centre 6-7 years ago, and we sat down with him, and he had this computer that, you know, you put something on you and he measured, yes. So my friend Marty was working with him. And he brought me in there. He's like, I've got to tell you about this stuff, Georgia. I'm finally, he's been very sort of mainstream. He's like, I'm coming around to the alternative viewpoint with Georgia. And he tested Jan, my husband, breathing, and he had like really good breathing, and he's asthmatic. And I was like, oh, you didn't do too badly. And then they tested me, and I was just awful. I'm like, I'm pretty healthy. I don't do yoga, and like, why? And he's like, that's why you're so hyperactive, and the way that you breathe is in between you're rushing, talking, and it's been that way. So I've never repaired that. All those problems when I was young have never been repaired, and that constant sympathetic stress sort of disposition has to do with my breathing, and it blew my mind. And I think that's what people don't realize, is that your behavior and your whole stress response, your whole nervous system is affected by the rate and depth and pace of your breathing.
Yeah. And it's really crucial in kids because we can retrain kids quite easily rather than them going through decades.
Not so easy with adults. I reckon it's much easier with children. You've got to, and that's it. You can talk about that on the. I'd love you to talk about what you can, the things that you can do with children, because it's so powerful. If you've missed the first 6 years, you can absolutely introduce breathing exercises and different techniques, you know, to improve it.
No, absolutely, and it's crucial. And the big part of that is sleep. And so if a child can breathe through the nose, and adults too, if you can breathe through your nose for 8 hours, you're going to feel so much better, and a child's going to develop the way it should as well. If they breathe through their nose, that's the most crucial thing they can do, and the daytime habits direct that. So the studies show with the Australian, the didgeridoo, where we can reverse sleep apnea by people using the oropharyngeal muscles. So it's so if you teach a child how to use the muscles, you're teaching them how to breathe for life. And there's nothing more crucial than breathing. Oxygen is the number one nutrient, and our teeth show us that. Yeah,
exactly. And so many other things connected to that. Like Okay, definitely have to have a little follow-up chat at some point to answer all the other questions that I have for you. So thank you. Everyone who wants to come to the event, I will post a link to the event down below underneath this. Hopefully I'll remember. It's on the 29th of July at Mangara Recreation Club. Only $97, and there are going to be, I think it's about $3,000 worth of raffle prizes on the day, if you can believe that. Just everyone giving their books and signed things, solid techniques, cooking pans. There's so much on offer. So I encourage you all to come along, and please share this video to help us spread the word about it. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Georgia.